Okay, folks, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, you know what we're talking about. Bread, just regular old bread.
Oh yeah, bread, the staff of life.
You know when you take a slice and it's got all those holes?
The crumb.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little connect the dots game, but edible.
Like that Jacques Brothers song.
Yeah, with the jam dripping right
Like
there.
a culinary masterpiece. But you know, those holes are actually more than meets the eye.
Seriously, like there's a whole world of science and history and techniques behind those simple holes in bread.
It's true.
And we're going to uncover all that today, right?
We are.
We're diving deep into the whole story. From those super basic ingredients, flour, water, salt, yeast, all the way to the baker's touch, the artistry.
Absolutely. We'll explore every nook and cranny of bread making.
So let's start right at the beginning. Where does this holy adventure begin?
Well, you got to start with the flour.
Flour, right. The heart of bread.
And when we talk about the flour for good bread, we're really talking about common wheat. You know, it's also called soft wheat.
Soft wheat, okay.
And, you know, picture those fields, late summer, all that golden grain waving in the breeze.
Oh yeah, I can picture that.
That's soft wheat, not like barley. Barley has a denser look with these long, kind of bristly things coming off it.
Bristly.
Yeah, wouldn't want to use that for your sourdough.
Definitely not. Stick with the golden waves, not the bristly beards. Now, this soft wheat, I think it's often planted as winter wheat, isn't it? It needs a little cold snap to get going.
You got it. It goes through something called vernalization. That's just a fancy term for needing a period of cold.
A cold spell to kickstart those ears of grain.
Exactly. It's kind of like a signal to the plant to start developing those ears.
Yeah.
And from there, the plant goes through different stages of growth.
Okay, like one.
Well, first there's tillering, where the plant starts sending out new shoots. Then it goes into stem elongation, where the stem starts growing taller. Then it flowers. And did you know that the stem itself is actually hollow?
No way.
Yeah. They call it the culm. And get this, the leaves even have tiny bits of silica in them.
Silica? Like what's in sand?
The very same. So, you know, handle those wheat stalks with care. They can actually give you a little paper cut if you're not paying attention.
Ouch. So admire the wheat from a safe distance unless you're wearing gloves. Now, we talked about soft wheat. What about that durum wheat? I see that on pasta packages all the time.
Whoa, durum wheat. Looks pretty similar to soft wheat, though the bristly bits can be a bit more noticeable. But the key difference is in its proteins. Durum wheat has different proteins that make it perfect for pasta and semolina. Gives them that wonderful chewiness.
Makes sense. You wouldn't want a chewy baguette.
Not really. So different wheats for different feats, you could say.
Right. So different wheats for different types of food. That's a good way to put it. Now we've got our wheat growing. When does it actually transform into that flour we need for baking?
Well, the big event is the harvest, usually happening between July and August. Of course, Mother Nature does her own thing, so the exact timing depends on where you are and what the weather's been like. After it's harvested, it all goes to the mill, and that's where things really get interesting.
The mill. That's where we go from grain to flour. But I'm guessing it's not just a big old blender.
Oh no, it's way more than that. Millers are like the unsung heroes of bread.
Unsung heroes.
They're the ones who check the wheat quality, and you know what? They often blend different types of wheat from different fields.
Nice.
It's a lot like what winemakers do, blending different grapes for the perfect flavor and character in their wine.
Wow, I never thought about that.
They're all about consistency, getting the absolute best flour.
So millers are like master mixologists of the wheat world.
That's a great way to put it.
So they blend it up, get their perfect mix. What happens next?
Next, the grains are cleaned and moistened. Just a little bit, mind you.
A touch of moisture. Why is that important?
Well, it helps loosen and separate the outer layers of the grain, the bran, from the inner part.
The endosperm.
You got it. The endosperm is what we want. It's the stuff that becomes the white flour.
So they're pampering those grains, getting them ready, and then comes the crushing, right?
Exactly. That's where the grains get ground. Traditionally, they use stone mills, and some smaller mills still use them today.
Old school.
Yeah. It can give a slightly different feel to the flour, but most modern mills use cylinder mills, which are incredibly efficient.
Makes sense. So we've got ground up grains, but it's probably not the fine flour we buy in bags, right?
You're sharp. It then goes through a sifting process. They use a series of sieves, getting finer and
You
finer.
get that perfect flour texture.
Exactly. That's how they separate the flour from the bran and any bits that didn't get ground up properly. And this is another moment where The miller's skills are super important.
How's that?
Well, they have to adjust the grinding and the sifting based on the type of wheat and what kind of flour they're aiming for.
It sounds like a real blend of science and art.
It is.
Speaking of different flours, I always get confused by those numbers on French flour bags. You know, like T65?
Oh yeah, the French classification system.
What's that all about?
It's all about the ash content of the flour. The T stands for type, and the number indicates the amount of ash left after burning a sample of the flour at a very high temperature.
Ash? Like what's left in the fireplace after a fire?
Sort of. It's not ash you can see in the flour itself. It's the mineral content that remains after burning.
Okay, so 265 tells us something about what's left behind after a serious baking session. What does it mean in practical terms?
Well, T65 is your classic French baguette flour. Higher numbers like T150 mean more ash, which means more of the whole grain is still present, including the bran, so you'd use that for a whole wheat loaf. And lower numbers, like T45, mean it's very refined, with less bran and ash. That's the kind you'd use for delicate pastries where you want a really light texture.
So the T number is like a little window into how much of the original wheat is still hanging around in the flour.
Exactly. It's a great way to understand the flour's properties at a glance.
So clever. It's like a built-in guide for bakers.
Okay, we've got our perfectly milled flour. What's the next step in the whole making journey?
Now we dive into the fascinating world of fermentation.
Fermentation? That sounds a little intimidating.
Not at all. Remember, flour is mainly starch. Those are complex molecules made up of simpler sugars linked together. Flour also has protein for gluten, a bit of fiber, and some fat.
Okay, I'm following.
But the real magic starts with those wild yeasts and bacteria that are naturally present in flour.
So there are already tiny life forms in the flour.
Exactly. Think of them as tiny hitchhikers.
Hitchhikers on a mission to make bread rise.
You got it. These microorganisms are essential for creating what we call leaven, or sourdough starter. Leaven, the heart of sourdough bread.
Basically, it's just flour and water, but those wild yeasts go crazy and start multiplying. It's like a little bubbling community.
A microscopic party happening in my flour and water. Sounds fascinating, but also a little scary. Is it hard to keep them happy?
It can be a bit temperamental. Leaven is sensitive to temperature, moisture, and drafts.
Like a little yeasty Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too cold, just right.
Exactly. Leaven is what makes the dough rise naturally, and that's how we get those air pockets and that characteristic tangy sourdough flavor.
So historically, bakers were like tiny yeast farmers tending to their cultures. That's a real skill.
It was. They had to carefully make and maintain their own leaven, constantly feeding it fresh flour and water.
Dedication.
It was an art. Nowadays, we also have commercially produced liquid or powdered leavens for those who want a little more convenience.
Ah, so that's what those packets of.
Yep. And then there's the ever-reliable baker's yeast.
Baker's yeast. That's what most of us grab at the supermarket. How does that compare to leaven?
Baker's yeast is a specific type of yeast that has been cultivated specifically for baking. It's very reliable, giving you predictable results, but it's important not to confuse it with baking powder.
Baking powder. Isn't that what makes cakes fluffy?
You got it. Baking powder is a chemical leavening agent, a mix of sodium bicarbonate and an acid like tartaric acid.
So baking powder is like a quick blast of rising power, while yeast and leaven are slow and steady.
Exactly. Baking powder is great for cakes, but for bread with all those lovely holes and complex flavors, you need the living organisms in yeast or leaven.
So baking powder is a sprint and yeast is a marathon.
I like that analogy.
Okay, now we've got our flour and our rising agent sorted. What does the baker actually do to transform that into a loaf of bread?
Ah, that's where the baker's craft really comes in. And the first key step is kneading.
Kneading. That sounds like a workout.
It certainly was. Traditionally, bakers would knead by hand, really work in that dough. Must have been tiring. Thankfully, most bakeries now use mechanical mixers, which are a lot more efficient. Usually they knead for about 15 minutes. The whole point of kneading is to develop the gluten in the flour.
Ah, gluten. Everyone talks about gluten. What does kneading do to it?
Kneading makes the proteins in flour, glutenin, and gliadin link up and form long, stretchy networks of gluten.
So it's like organizing those protein strands into a strong and stretchy network.
Exactly. Think of it like stretching out a ball of Play-Doh. The gluten network gives the dough its structure, its elasticity, and the strength to hold its shape.
So kneading is like building the framework for those air pockets.
Exactly. After kneading, the dough needs a rest. This is called proofing or sometimes pointage.
Time for the dough to chill out.
Exactly. During proofing, Those complex starches in the flour start breaking down into simpler sugars, like glucose.
Ah, so that's the yeast's dinner.
It is. They love those simple sugars.
They're ready for a feast.
They are. And after this first rest, the baker weighs the dough and shapes it into loaves.
So from a big lump to baguettes or boulets or whatever they're making.
Exactly. And after shaping comes another rest period. The final proof.
More resting. Bakers must be very patient people.
They are. This final proof is where the magic really happens. The yeasts keep munching on those sugars, and they produce alcohol, that's alcoholic fermentation, and very importantly, carbon dioxide gas.
Carbon dioxide, the key ingredient for our holes.
Absolutely. These tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide get trapped within the gluten network. Those trapped bubbles are what we call alveoli, the holes in the bread.
So the dough is literally inflating with tiny gas bubbles.
Exactly. And because of the gluten, it can stretch and expand without bursting, just like a balloon.
Fascinating.
And you know those cuts on top of the bread? That's called scoring or slashing.
Oh yeah, I always wondered about those. They look so pretty.
Scoring is definitely about aesthetics, but it's also practical.
How so?
It controls where the dough will expand in the oven, preventing random bursting. It's directing those bursts of energy.
Smart. So it's time for the oven, finally.
Yes. The initial baking temperature is quite high, often around 250 degrees C.
That's hot. What happens inside the dough at the temperature?
In the first few minutes, the remaining yeasts get one last burst of energy, producing a final puff of carbon dioxide. But there's also the water in the dough to consider.
The water, what role does it play?
Well, with all that heat, the water turns into steam. And this steam pushes outwards, contributing to the bread's rise as it tries to escape. So we've got both carbon dioxide from the yeast and steam from the water, helping to create that light and airy texture.
So it's a team effort of gases.
Exactly. It's amazing how these biological and physical processes work together.
It really makes you appreciate a simple slice of bread more, doesn't it?
It does. And speaking of appreciation, we should talk about the history of bread, especially in France.
Ah, French bread. There's something special about it, isn't there?
You know, in the early 20th century, the average person in France ate about 1 kilogram of bread every day.
A kilogram? That's a lot of bread.
It is. Today it's closer to 140 grams, still quite a bit. And of course, the baguette is a global symbol of France.
That golden, crusty icon.
Indeed. But it's not all about baguettes. France has over 100 different types of bread.
Wow, I have no idea.
Each region often has its own specialty. There's the twisted bread of Gers, the hat-shaped bread of Finistère, the lint rolls of Normandy. And in early 20th century Paris, they had this amazing thing called wine merchant's bread.
Wine merchant's bread, what was that like?
Picture this, loaves up to 1.7 meters long, weighing up to 2 kilograms.
A 2-kilogram loaf of bread, that's bigger than my dog.
They were sold to bistros in Paris, easy to slice for sandwiches. Imagine the crumb in those huge loaves.
It's mind-boggling. We've gone from tiny grains to these giant loaves. Is there anything else to the bread-making story?
There's one last bit. When bread comes out of the oven, you might hear a very subtle sound as it cools. They call it le chant du pain, the singing of the bread.
The singing of the bread, that sounds magical.
It's a very gentle cracking sound caused by steam and gases escaping from the loaf. It's almost like the bread sighing with contentment after its journey through the oven.
That's beautiful. So from simple flour and water to a singing loaf, it really highlights the science and tradition behind bread making.
It really does. Nature and human skill working together to create something delicious and essential.
So next time you're enjoying a slice of bread, remember the incredible journey it's been on. Those holes are a testament to a whole world of knowledge and tradition.
It makes you wonder what other everyday things have such fascinating stories hiding inside them, just waiting to be discovered.
So true. Well, folks, that's our deep dive into bread for today.
Until next time.
We'll see you then.